November 1979, a small soul club on the south side of Compton. The sign above the door had been missing two letters for at least 2 years, and nobody had gotten around to fixing it. Inside, sticky floors, 4 rows of tables, a stage barely wide enough for a four-piece band. Tuesday nights were open talent nights. $10 at the door, cash only. The bartender knew half the people by name. In the far corner, a young man sat alone with a glass of Coke he hadn't touched. Hoodie pulled up, baseball cap underneath, head angled slightly down toward the table. He looked like a college student who'd wandered in off the street. He'd driven from Encino. Told nobody where he was going. Just got in the car and drove until he heard music coming through a doorway and walked in. He did this sometimes, more often lately. He needed to watch people perform without being the one performing. Needed to sit somewhere dark and anonymous and just remember what this felt like from the outside. Before the lights, before the label meetings, before anybody had an opinion about what he was supposed to be next. Off the Wall had been out for 3 months. The reviews said remarkable things. Sales were doing what everyone had hoped. But Michael Jackson, sitting alone in that corner at 20 years old, was not thinking about reviews. He was thinking about something a radio programmer had said to him at a label meeting 2 weeks before. The man looked at him across a conference table, calm, almost kind. Pop doesn't have a long memory. You had a moment. Ride it while you can. Michael had smiled and shaken his hand, but those words had gone somewhere they couldn't be reached. The fourth act that Tuesday was a young man named Marcus Webb. 22 years old, trained, and it showed. He'd been dancing since he was 9 and had the kind of body control that made people set their drinks down. He stepped to the center of the stage, nodded at the DJ, and waited. The opening bass line of "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough" rolled through the speakers. Marcus moved, and he moved well. Footwork clean, isolations locked, timing precise in a way that required real hours behind it. The room gave him their attention. In the back corner, Michael watched without moving. The technique was all there. Every count hit, every transition landed. But as Michael watched, something kept pulling at him. A quiet wrongness he couldn't let go of. Marcus was performing the song the way a person reads a paragraph they've memorized, every word correct, nothing missing. The groove that lived inside that track, the thing that made it impossible to stay in your seat, wasn't coming through his body. He was dancing to the song. He wasn't inside it. When Marcus finished, the room gave him a solid hand. The man running the night was Derek Morrison, 34, built like a former athlete. He'd danced professionally for 6 years, gotten 2 Broadway callbacks, never gotten the part, and had ended up here, hosting Tuesday nights in Compton. He wasn't a bad person, but something in the way he spoke to performers, a particular weight in his feedback, suggested he was still keeping some kind of score. Derek clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Clean," he said into the mic. "Foundation is solid, timing sharp." A small pause. "But the middle section, upper body is getting ahead of your lower body on the turnarounds. Small thing, work on it." Marcus nodded. Derek was already turning back to his list when the voice came from the back corner. Not loud, just clear. "It's not the turnarounds." Derek stopped. A few people turned. The young man in the hoodie hadn't changed position. "The problem is, he's counting the music instead of hearing it. You can see it in his shoulders. They're working the whole time. They should be resting." The room got a little quieter. Derek looked toward the back corner, and a particular expression settled on his face. He'd seen this before. Every open night had at least one. The guy at the far table with an opinion he'd been holding since he walked in. Derek smiled, even, patient. "Thank you for that," he said into the mic. "We do have a tradition here, though. Talking about the music is easy. Stage is right here." He gestured toward it. "Come show us what you mean." A few people laughed. The easy laugh of a crowd that senses something is about to be settled. The young man raised one hand. A brief, quiet wave off. Derek's smile held, but something behind it shifted. "No? Okay." He looked out at the room. "Guess our expert is more comfortable with the view from the back." More laughter. The young man didn't react. He reached for his Coke, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. But there was something nobody in that room knew yet. About 10 minutes earlier, a car had stopped on the street outside. The man who stepped out was wearing a dark jacket over a black shirt, moving with the deliberate ease of someone who had been performing since before most people in that club were born. He was 56 years old. He had built an entire vocabulary of sound and movement from nothing. And somewhere between 20 and 30 careers existed because of what he'd figured out, including the career of the young man in the back corner. James Brown had been at a meeting across town that ran long. His driver took a shortcut. The shortcut went past this club. James heard music through the window and said simply, "Stop." He wasn't in the habit of explaining himself when something pulled at him. He never had been. He walked in alone, stood near the entrance while his eyes adjusted, found the stage first, then the exits, then the faces. His gaze moved through the dim and settled on the corner table. He went still, looked again, making sure. Then he crossed the room without speaking to anyone, pulled out the chair across from the young man, and sat down. Michael looked up. "James." James Brown looked at him with an expression that was part amusement and part something harder to name. He'd known Michael since the boy was 9, had watched him perform and thought, this child understands something that most people spend a lifetime trying to reach. And now here he was, 20 years old, sitting alone in a dark corner in Compton, letting a man with a clipboard take shots at him in front of strangers. "What happened just now?" James said. Not quite a question. Michael gave him the short version. Marcus on stage, the comment, the invitation he'd turned down. James was quiet, looked at the stage, looked back. "You declined." "There's no point. He doesn't know who I am." "No," James said. "He doesn't." He adjusted his jacket. "So what?" Michael didn't answer. James leaned forward slightly. "When I was your age, I played a club in Macon where nobody knew me either. Promoter told me to keep it under 40 minutes. Headliner needed the stage." He paused. "I played 2 hours, not to make a point to him, because the music needed 2 hours." He looked at Michael. "That man with the clipboard is not giving you permission to be what you are." From the stage, Derek's voice carried across the room. "Moving on. Any other volunteers tonight?" James Brown looked at Michael. Michael looked at the stage. Something moved in his face. Not anger. Quieter than that. More like a decision that had been waiting. He stood up. The stage was small, a single overhead light, slightly yellow, throwing a circle maybe 8 feet across. A microphone on a stand. Michael stepped up and the floor creaked once under his foot. Derek saw him coming. The corners of his mouth moved. The talker becomes the doer. He'd watched this play out before. The man gets up, falls short, sits back down. Everyone learns something. "Name," Derek said. "Michael." "What are we doing?" Michael looked toward the DJ booth. "Don't stop." From the top. Derek nodded and stepped to the side of the stage, arms crossed. Comfortable. The bass line started. Michael stood still for 4 full counts, head slightly down, like he was listening for something specific inside the music. The room waited. People who had gone back to their conversations paused without knowing why. On the 5th count, he started to move. The first thing that happened was nothing that could be called impressive. He just swayed, one shoulder dropping, then the other. But the sway was sitting in a pocket of rhythm that Marcus had never found. A space between the kick drum and the bass where the song's real weight lived. The moment Michael settled into it, something in the room shifted. Derek unfolded his arms. There was no announcement. The attention just gathered, the way it does when something in a room actually changes. A woman in the front row set her phone face down on the table without thinking about it. The bartender stopped moving. Marcus Webb, standing at the side of the stage, went completely still. His eyes locked on the stage with the focus of someone watching something they had not known was possible. Michael didn't perform the song. He made the argument for why the song needed to exist. When the groove pushed, he pushed. When it rested, he rested. His shoulders, the ones he'd said should be resting, rested, and in that rest was more information than in anything Marcus had done in 3 clean minutes. Then he sang. Not loud. He didn't need volume. He sang the first line the way you say something true to someone sitting close to you, and the frequency of it, not the sound, the frequency, landed somewhere in the chest. Derek Morrison felt the recognition before he let himself believe it. He knew this voice. He'd heard it in his car, coming out of record store speakers, on the radio at the end of a long drive. His mind was building a connection his body was already a step ahead of. James Brown stood up from his table. He walked slowly toward the stage and stopped a few feet from the edge. There was a smile on his face that wasn't performing anything. When the second verse hit, a young woman 2 tables back recognized it first. She touched her friend's arm. One by one, the connection moved through the room, and the room did not erupt. That's the thing. It got quieter. Because what was happening on that stage didn't need a reaction. It only needed to be there. When it ended, Michael stood in that yellow light for a moment, then stepped off. James Brown began to clap. Slow, deliberate, the only sound in the room for 1 beat, 2, and then everyone followed. Derek Morrison was 4 feet away. He opened his mouth, closed it. He had a sentence ready, something starting with an apology, but it didn't come out because the apology felt too small for what had just happened, and he knew it. Michael looked at him. Nothing cold in it. Nothing enjoying itself. The shoulders, Michael said quietly. Tell Marcus about the shoulders. Then he pulled the hoodie back up and walked to the corner table, picked up his Coke and finished it. James Brown sat back down across from him. Outside, a car passed on the street. The music in the club started again. Someone else taking the stage. But the room's temperature hadn't fully come back to what it had been before. You feel better? James said. Michael thought about the conference table, the programmer's even voice. A moment. Ride it while you can. Yeah, he said, I do. They stayed another half hour. 2 men 20 years apart, in a room where most people still had no idea who was sitting in the back corner. At some point, Derek Morrison walked to the other end of the bar and didn't come back. When James finally stood to leave, he put one hand briefly on Michael's shoulder on his way past. No words. Outside, the November night had gotten cold the quiet way LA nights do. Michael drove back to Encino with the window down, one hand on the wheel. He didn't turn the radio on. He already had what he came for.